Today I'm in Sedgwick County, which is where Wichita, Kansas is, which is where I'm from. That's where I've been living for the last almost 20 years. And I've been wanting to explore around the county more, but I'm always going somewhere. I'm always traveling to go somewhere else. And for a variety of circumstances, weather related a little bit, I had to stay home this weekend. So I thought, you know what? Let's explore around home to some of these places that I've seen on maps as I look at the details of some of the maps, but I've never been to. And so what I'm going to do, when you have a county with as much population as Sedgwick County, I'm gonna kind of stay away from the cities and the towns. So the county is kind of east-west. The road is 54 and 400. In Wichita, we call that Kellogg. And that's the part, that passes through the city. So today I'm going to stay south of Kellogg, 400, and I'm going to stay outside of kind of the Wichita and vicinity area. So I'm going to kind of get out of that, kind of around to the, east, southeast, and then over to the southwest of the county. Got, a dozen or so dots on the map that I've never been to that used to have post offices, and we may pass through some other towns. I've kind of wanting to save some of those towns for other videos, so maybe just give you a glimpse of what some of the other small towns in those areas are, but mostly focus on trying to learn about what happened to these, non-existent towns, or maybe they have something there that'll give us a clue. So we're going to start on the east and southeast side of the county and head west. Iowaville had a post office for 28 years, from 1874 to 1902. And now it just feels like an extension of Wichita. There's some houses kind of spread out. There is a little tiny bus or something, a bus stop. It's kind of interesting. I wonder if the person just put that there randomly, or if, they're like, hey, this is Iowaville. I wonder if people here even know that there was a post office for almost 30 years called Iowaville here. As we're exploring around, obviously the history of Wichita influences these areas a lot. And with the growth of Wichita, a lot of these towns died out. And I did a video a while ago about the history of Wichita, but I talked about another, you could say it was a ghost town. It's actually a part of Wichita now called Delano. And it was like the Wild West part of Wichita. But through talking about that, I talked about how Wichita grew, and what it was in the 1860s to the 1870s, and how it ended up becoming a boom town with the railroads and being a cow town. And so, if you're interested in like the history of Wichita, talk about that. Wyatt Earp was a big part of that video. And it's pretty interesting to learn more about the history of Wichita, and then that'll give you perspective on the dates and how it affected some of these ghost towns back in the day. Our next dot on the map is called Waco, and it was originally called Cowskin from 1870 to 1873, and then changed to Waco until 1905. That was how long the post office went. And I read that it was an Indian village. And so it's kind of interesting. You think of the word Waco and you think of Waco, Texas. That's where Baylor University is. And in downtown Wichita, there's a Waco Street as well. It's interesting because that 1873 time, that would have been, near the beginning of the start of Wichita. So certainly was a different time. There's not much here now, in where it says Waco on the map. There is a little community, but it's just some houses and a dead-end little street. There's a horticulture center on the corner. But not a lot of remnants of, the past. But yeah, the post office closed over 120 years ago, so there probably won't be. We've come down to the southern border of Sedgwick County. In fact, this post office behind me here in Peck is in Sedgwick County, but over on that side of the street, that's actually Sumner County, as the main road here goes right on the county line. And Peck was started as a railroad stop in 1887. It's still got the post office still going. Definitely some remnants of what it used to be. Kind of the main street looks like it runs a little bit north and south with some old buildings. I actually talked to somebody who lives in this spectacular looking home right across the street in Sumner County, and they were telling me like there used to be a blacksmith shop there, there's a church down the way, there used to be a gas station here on the corner where there's nothing now, and you know, it was a nice little town, and people moved over to Mulvane or to Wichita, and it just keeps getting smaller and smaller. There is a business down the way, a little restaurant. They say that some of the best burgers you might ever have, so I'll have to come down another time and get a burger here in Peck. There were a lot of different railroads that were, you know, heading into Wichita or heading out of Wichita. So there were different railroad stops that were created, and Bayneville was one of them in 1884, and it had a post office all the way until 1934. So it was a, you know, shipping point of importance. It was named after a Judge Bain, who was a railroad promoter. So obviously that was, you know, they tried to get a town started here, and it was successful for, you know, 50 years or so. Coming here now, you wouldn't even know that there was anything, you know, at the railroad area. It's just pretty innocent, you know, looks like the railroad probably doesn't come through here anymore. And then there's one little street that goes through the town, and, you know, just a normal little community here, you know, southwest of Wichita. You know, something that I find interesting that happens more than you might think. So we just went to this, you know, place Ruby, where there's no evidence of a town, but there's people that live there, and and they're all pretty new, modern looking houses, and you just wonder, like, you know, are those houses there now because there were people here in the, you know, 1880s, and it was a town or community or post office that didn't last very long, but there's people in that little spot, and then it's wide open, and, you know, there's no houses for, you know, in that vicinity, and then in that corner where the town on the map there's a dot, there are houses. So that's kind of interesting, almost if you can see like a time lapse of that corner or that little spot on the road for 150 years. That would be fascinating to see. Clonmel is named after an Irish town, and had a post office from 1905 till 1938, and was a stop on the railroad. And not a lot more information about it, except that when you get here, there is a church, and the oldest building I could find here was built in 1947. So on the tail end of that time when it was maybe a little bit larger community. And then across the road, you can see the evidence of where the railroad was, and there's still some, agricultural business going on over there. And that's about it. There's, it said in the early 1900s there's maybe 40 or 50 people that lived here, and probably a little more, a little bigger than it is today. I'm imagining there's just a handful of people that might call this kind of their hometown now. But the church has a cemetery I'm walking around, and most of the headstones are fairly new. So interesting to know what it would have looked like, or what kind of activity was here, in the early 1900s, when they had hopes of being a much more significant town, I'm sure. Viola is not quite a ghost town. Hopefully it won't be in the future, but it certainly has gotten smaller. But I thought I'd stop by, since it's kind of on the way to where I'm going next, and check it out. It's a little bit too small for some of the other towns I profile. They're usually a little bit bigger than this. And it's a nice town. It was started in the 1870s and had a different name, like Piontone or something. It was kind of a strange name. And then in the late 1890s, it was switched to Viola, and it grew as a railroad stop, and it grew to over 500 people, so pretty good size. And then right around the 1920s, had 2/3 of the population dropped off, and that was a huge chunk, and then it's kind of stayed in that ballpark for the last 100 years. Had a school here. I'm standing right next to the school, and now it's a library, and it says 1917 on the sign on the front, and inside it says 1907 to 1965. So maybe there was a different school before this, and they had a high school here for those 50-60 years. But the town, it's a nice town. It's a clean town. There are some old buildings, and then it's mostly just modern houses and the 115 people that live here. So cool stop along our ghost towns. Not a ghost town. Hopefully, doesn't become a ghost town. It's lost 80% of its population from its peak, so unfortunately it's heading in that direction. We made it over to Anness, and it was named after a woman named Anne. She was the wife of the kind of like founder of this town, and he named it after her. Nice guy. And at a post office for 65 years, from 1887 to 1952, and in the early 1900s had a population of about 70. And as I'm flew my drone, all I could see is one house. So there's a population of a handful now. And it was along the railroad. They built it because of the railroad was coming through here, and you can see the evidence of where that railroad probably came through. And they have a co-op here, but just pretty wide open, and not much else left of Anness. What's kind of amazing about Wichita and the area around it is that how close we are to the city, and we feel like we're in the middle of like Wyoming, or something just that's really far from any population. based. There was a country music singer named Craig Morgan who shot a video called International Harvester, and he filmed it in Wichita because he needed a place to film in a city, and he needed a place to film literally in the middle of nowhere within a few minutes, and you can get in the middle of nowhere in a couple miles from Wichita. So one of the unique things about living in Wichita, you can feel like you're out in the country pretty quick. Our next ghost town has a familiar name for people that live around here. It's called Afton. And most people have heard of Lake Afton, and actually it's right here. But in 1874, there was a post office and community called Afton, and it lasted for only a dozen years or so. And then eventually Lake Afton has become like a recreational area that's pretty popular here on the western side of Sedgwick County. Right now, there's nothing much here except for a couple houses, one really nice like ranch or farm. So Schulte is an unincorporated community now, and it appears to me that it's pretty much everything to do with the church here. And it kind of got an interesting history. I found a long history on the church's website that you could read more about. And there was a guy named Peter Schulte who came here from Germany, came to the United States from Germany, and then eventually came to Kansas, the Wichita area, and then settled here and farmed the land and started a church. And then in the early 1900s, the railroad came through here, and that obviously helped this area become more significant than just having a church or some farms out here. And they started a post office, and the town grew somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 people. And then post office ended in the 1930s, but now it's a beautiful area they have church, they have kind of a nice cemetery that's looks like it's kind of maybe has certain hours that it's open. They have a ball field, so certainly still a community left here in Schulte. We're working our way back. We're basically in Wichita as we arrive to Oatville. And as you drive through, it's just, it looks just like businesses and houses and kind of like just like you're in the suburbs. But there was a town here started in 1884. It had a post office for 52 years. And in the early 1900s, there was a population of 40 or 50 people. And there's a few older businesses. There's a couple churches. There's a Buddhist temple, which is very interesting. I don't think it dates back over 100 years or anything like that, but definitely a couple of interesting things to see as you're driving through Oatville. So the last town on my list was a town called Gladys, and it only had a post office for like 3 years. And it's somewhere around here. There's a railroad tracks right here. I'm guessing it was a railroad stop and didn't end up being much of a town because the post office was gone pretty quickly, although there's plenty of people that live in this area. Like I was saying, we're basically it's on the south side of Wichita, so kind of an anticlimactic finish. So I'm going to break my rule when I said I'm only going to stay outside of the, basically the Wichita proper. So I'll show you kind of like the ultimate ghost town. It's one of the landmarks of Wichita. This is what's considered Old Town in Wichita, and this is not the ghost town that I was referring to, but this is a cool place to drive through as we're heading towards our next site, which is called Keeper of the Plains. And I came here to this area because the Wichita tribe had settled here in 1863. They had been driven from their land in Oklahoma, called the Indian Territory at that time. They were driven from their land by the Confederate forces during the Civil War, and then they established a settlement right here on the banks of the Little Arkansas River. This is the confluence of the Little Arkansas and the Arkansas, as they say here. And they established a settlement. And then during this period, trader Jesse Chisholm established a trading post at the site, one of several along a trail extending south of Texas, which became known as the Chisholm Trail. Then in 1867, after the war, the Wichita returned back to Oklahoma, and there's different things named after Wichita in Oklahoma and Texas, as you might be aware. So there was a little settlement here, we'll call it a ghost town, and then obviously the city of Wichita got its name from that little settlement. And then this is the Keeper of the Plains, where this is probably one of the most well-known landmarks in the city right here on the river, very picturesque, and really a cool place to learn a lot about the history in this little area on the bridge. So hopefully you've enjoyed the tour of southern Sedgwick County. Next week we'll be back to finish up on the northern half of the county. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of that video. And now that you're here, let me tell you a little bit about some of the extras that we have on the channel. One of the things you can do is you can become a member. There's 3 levels. There's the supporter level, there's the producer level, and the executive producer level. And all 3 levels have different perks, and as you are more supportive financially, there's more perks. We have extra videos every week and a lot of fun stuff going on in the member section. If you haven't done so, make sure you check out travelwithawiseguy.com. We've got lots of extra stuff on there, and one of the things is merchandise. You can get you Travel with a Wise Guy t-shirt. We have Death Go Round t-shirts. We have some coffee mugs, different things that are a lot of fun, and people seem to have enjoyed. Good quality there. Also on the website, you can do things like check out the Google map. I have a pin dropped in every place I've done videos about, then a link to the video so you can look at the map, and maybe there's somewhere where you live or somewhere you want to go. You can check out that map, and it seemed to be a very popular thing. You can sign up for my newsletter. I do that about every 3 weeks. It's totally free. And there's also all kinds of other links and tidbits in there, old videos, podcasts, just everything I could think of I throw on the website. So make sure you check out travelwithawiseguy.com. Thank you for everyone who has been supportive of this channel, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. And now for the reason you're probably here, the outtakes. Viola, Death Go Round. Let's see how it rates. A little old school squeak. I like the design, and it spins pretty well. Yeah, that's a solid 8 out of 10.